Will the Water and Infrastructure Committee of March 17th, 2025, please come to order? The time is now 1:34 p.m. May I ask that all participants please silence all noise-making devices. I am your chair, Tom Cook. Members, per the Sunshine Law, please identify by name who, if anyone, is in the room, vehicle, or workplace with you today, exclusive of minors. Before we would begin, I would also like to ask the department representatives who have joined online to please also turn on your cameras when it's your turn to speak. Now I'd like to introduce the committee members. Committee Vice Chair Yukili Sukumura. Hello, she's coming. Councilmember Tasha Kama. Aloha, good afternoon.
Aloha Winola Chair.
Council Chair Alice Lee.
Okay, the morning, the day's greeting is Majinwa, and as Pat from Park said, Slancha. So this is all having to do with, being, what, the Green Day? St. Patrick's Day.
The green thing. And aloha and happy St. Patrick's Day, Councilmember Paulton.
Beijinwa, Shlo, Shlaka, whatever. Aloha Winala, streaming live and direct from my kitchen table. I have with me one unnamed minor, one canine minor, and Mildred H. Paulton. Thank you.
And good afternoon, aloha, St. Patrick's Day, Member County Rollins Fernandez.
Aloha awina kako, my Molokai nui ahina. I am at the Molokai District Office. Alone on my side of the office, there are currently no testifiers here. Happy St. Patty's Day, and hau'oli laha no to Kamehameha III. Mahalo, Chair.
Councilmember Shane Sinensi is not here, but I'm expected. Good afternoon, Councilmember No'ilani U'uhajits.
Good afternoon, Chair. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. I would say the day's greeting, but it was just too hard, and I don't want to jumble it up.
Okay, from the Department of Water Supply, we have Ms. Eva Blumenstein, Planning Program Administrator. Good afternoon, Eva.
Aloha, Chair. Good afternoon.
From the Department of Public Works, we have Director Jordan Molina.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And we also have Councilmember Johnson online that I've welcome and aloha. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair. Aloha, council members Majinwa and Shincha, I guess. It's always important to speak the language of the oppressed, so hearts out to the Irish folks who are struggling for their independence. I am alone in my workspace. There's no testifiers at the Lanai District Office, and I'm here and ready to work. Mahalo, Chair.
We want to welcome Director Shane Ngawa, who's going to be online. And Theo Leong, Wastewater Operations Training Officer. Is he online?
Chair, I believe they'll be joining us later during the meeting.
Excellent. From Corporation Counsel, we have Deputy Corporation Counsel Caleb Rowe.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And from OCS, our committee staff, we have Keone Hurdle, Jared Pasquale, Lori Ann Tengan, Carla Nagata, and Jean Paula. And we always appreciate our staff. And welcome Councilmember Sinensi is in the house.
Hello, Chair. Sorry for my tardiness and Ajinwa.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. For today's meeting, we have 3 items on today's agenda. Y5 on flood hazard areas, Y-4 on an intergovernmental agreement with the U.S. Geological Survey, and Y-3 on an intergovernmental agreement with the State Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, Hawaii Occupational Safety and Health Division. Let's begin with today's testimony at the beginning of the meeting. Staff, do we have any testifiers?
Chair, there's no individuals signed up to testify at the beginning of the meeting. Would you like me to do a last call?
Yes.
If anyone would like to testify, please come up to the podium or raise your hand on Teams. This is final call for testimony at the beginning of the meeting. The countdown is 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Okay. As a reminder, we'll continue to take testimony after opening remarks. We'll move on to the first item, Y-5, Bill 28, 2025, flood hazard areas. Members, this first item is Bill 28, entitled "A Bill for an Ordinance Amending Chapter 16.29 Maui County Code relating to the flood hazard areas." Bill 28's purpose is to allow additional flood-prone areas not delineated on the Federal Emergency Management Areas flood insurance rate map to be included within the special flood hazard area. I would like to also note that I have a proposed CD1 version of this resolution, which has been uploaded to Granicus and passed out at today's meeting. Before we begin, Director Molina, would you please provide opening comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Y Committee. Jordan Molina, Director with Public Works. Thank you for hearing this matter. So we're here today with a proposed ordinance to amend our flood program code to establish a process to look at adopting flood-prone areas, as the Chair mentioned, outside the existing firm maps. And so some background on this matter: after the wildfires, one of the various tasks of technical support we got from FEMA was to conduct flood mapping in Lahaina burn zone. The impetus for that is mainly to address the potential for increased sediment and runoff post-fire that can occur when fire removes all the vegetation on the ground, and should a heavy rain event follow, there is that increased risk of sediment loading throughout the drainage area into our infrastructure and affecting properties. So that's what triggered FEMA to offer this flood study for Lahaina post-fire. So we are in that process now, finalizing those flood studies. So what came out of that was a discussion about our existing ordinance and what would we do with that information that FEMA is providing us. So today is that first piece of that puzzle, which is to establish that process by which we would bring this new information that we obtain on flood areas and flood maps and establish a procedure by which we would adopt those areas to become regulated under the county's flood ordinance. So that is the proposal we're here requesting consideration on. So there's two parts to the ordinance. One is directing the Director of Public Works to bring forward that information to council when it becomes available, when we obtain either from the state or from the feds, engineered flood maps to delineate those areas of flooding. So that's a requirement to bring that forward to council. And then the second part is for council to act on whether to adopt those areas into the flood program, to have to require flood permits for those areas. We anticipate the work in Lahaina being ready to go out for public comment sometime in May, which we'll be introducing kind of those new areas we identify or that's been mapped as being flood prone, and developing the framework by which those areas would be subject to flood permits. So that's all I have at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Molina. Before we discussion, let's see if anyone would like to provide testimony on Y5.
Chair, there's currently no individual signed up to testify on Y5. If anyone would like to testify in the chamber or on Teams, please raise your hand or come down to the podium. This is final call. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Members, seeing that there are no more individuals wishing to testify without objection, I will now close oral testimony.
No objections?
As a reminder, written testimony will continue to be accepted into the record. Members, I'm proposing 2 rounds of 3-minute questions per member. Are there any objections? Thank you, members. Let's just begin the discussion. We will start with Councilmember Johnson.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious overall, and my first reaction is how does this affect our flood insurance? Maybe Director can, I'm not sure who would want to speak on that, but that's one of my concerns is how does this affect folks? Does it lower their flood insurance? Does it increase? Is it harder to get? Have we considered that?
Director Molina.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so by being in part of the flood program, it ensures access to flood insurance. So some of these properties that currently are outside flood zones could have trouble getting flood insurance. But it is, as you kind of alluded to, it is an additional cost and burden on certain properties, but at the exchange of protecting them from those known flood hazards in those areas.
Now, I don't follow much what's going on at the state level, but I know there was some discussions of, in regards to condominiums and their insurance, and the state's looking to help out. Director, have you been following that? How does that work with this bill?
Director.
I am not an expert on that, but the flood insurance is kind of its own animal, separate from any sort of fire insurance or property insurance that those condos might be having to deal with. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, that's my questions from now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Member Kama, questions for the Director?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, so this was initiated because of the after fire, yeah? So does this only apply to the Lahaina area, or could this be applied to across the county?
Thank you. So the specific one in Lahaina was a direct result of the fire and that support we got through the FEMA activation. It is able to go broader. So a second component that's being done is DLNR with the state is doing modeling of the stream areas across the county so to better map the flood risk along streams. So it can be done in other areas. We are beginning looking at some of our areas in Kihei to do this mapping as well, but it's not cheap. I think FEMA's already in the $500,000 to $1 million range just to do the modeling and the mapping required to develop this level of flood mapping.
Oh, okay. So my second question is, I on page 1, 16.29.040, 1ABCD, it has these flood area and floodway in zone AEF, zones AE. What does that stand for? What does that mean? All those acronyms or initials or?
Yeah, thank you. So those represent the different types of flood zones that are identified. And each of those have differing types of requirements depending on the level of flood. So some are shallow flooding, so the mitigations are a lot simpler. But like, for example, our zone VE, our coastal ones, those are some of the most extreme requirements, which can include elevating the structure and keeping it entirely clear based on the flood elevations, which can be 10 to 15 to 17 feet in some areas.
Wow. So when DLNR is going to do their special flood hazard areas delineation, who pays for that? Them, or does us, or collectively we both pay for that?
The current effort underway by DLNR is being funded by them.
Okay. And would that be sufficient enough to cover all of our county? the study that you'll be doing?
It's focused just on the stream areas.
Yeah.
And so there can be localized flooding outside of stream areas. So like in Lahaina, for example, a lot of the flooding we see in the Waine'e area is not directly from a stream per se. It's just the way the topography of the land drains and those low-lying areas find themselves inundated when we have heavy storms.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I want to welcome Member Sugimura and ask if you want to ask questions or if you want to wait.
I'll wait, but
Okay.
sorry for being tardy. It was in another meeting.
Well,
Thank
you're
you.
more than welcome, and this is good afternoon. Chair Lee, you have
Thank you.
questions for the director?
Yes. Before I start, though, I want to let you know I have to leave at 3:15 to go to a funeral. Director Molina, with the studies that were done, was the public notified, the property owners affected notified?
Not at this time, but we are going to be doing a public outreach effort once we solidify the mapping and have a product that we can take to the public, as well as working on individual notifications to each property owner.
So with us voting on this today, it doesn't obligate the property owners at this point?
That's correct. We're not adopting the map today, so nobody's going to be in a new flood zone after today. We're just creating that process, so when we do have a map, we can have that discussion.
Okay, so this is enabling legislation?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, I was worried about that because sometimes the property owner is not at fault. It's usually the property above him that oftentimes contributes to their problems of flooding. Okay, thank you.
Chair, if I may, the kind of flooding we're talking about are not just because your neighbor. It's because the whole mountain that you live on is flooding you out, not just particularly your neighbor.
Yeah, well, I meant, like, let's say in Maui Meadows or in those areas, those big ditches, those big, whatever, ravines, whatever you call it, when the people throw their opala inside, yeah, and there's a heavy storm, the person at the bottom catches it, and so that's what I mean about the person at the bottom getting,
Thank you.
The brunt of it. Thanks.
Councilmember Paulton, you have questions for the director?
You know that. Okay, so my first question, you're talking beyond, because you're expecting the vegetation to grow back. So when you said that this was triggered by that, this is beyond the after effects of the fire. It's just like 50-year or 100-year storms we're talking about?
Yeah, these are Model 200-year storms.
Okay, good. And then how much does a flood permit cost?
I believe $440 in the current rates and fee schedule. And that's just
And
the
then,
review.
so many of the people may build back before this process finishes. Is that accurate or not accurate?
That's correct.
Oh, okay. And then what does the flood permit do? It just requires people to like elevate or something?
Yeah, that's generally the requirement, is that the structures are elevated and that they are not creating conditions that cause or exacerbate flooding on the neighboring properties.
And then for many of the National Historic Landmark District or historic districts, the recommendation is for post and pier and backfilling. Is that correct? So that they can get their permits? Would that backfilling contribute to more flooding, or is it better backfilling and post and pier construction?
On an individual parcel, it's generally not better because it's you save one parcel at the detriment of others. So really, filling should be done across the flood zone to ensure that it's not creating an adverse impact to the abutting properties.
Oh, okay. And so is the county keeping track of the recommendation, because I think Howley Camp, that was the recommendations because some bones were identified that, you know, if people wanted to rebuild in the area to backfill and post and pier, the Kawaula subdivision, sorry.
Yeah, so if they're in a current existing flood zone, they'll be subject to the standards of the flood ordinance when they rebuild. And I cannot say if that's
Okay.
or generally, yeah, that's not filling up the ground or raising
And then,
the ground.
are we anticipating that this would trigger more calls for flood permits? And do we have adequate staff to process the permits in a timely manner?
Yeah, I mean, tentatively right now, from the draft mapping, we're in the vicinity of 1,000 parcels that potentially are now subject to flood permits. We're working to kind of refine that number to make sure we're confident behind it. We're growing our flood program, and so yeah, we're cognizant of being able to process those permits timely. But we do have some consultant support to support our flood team, so we feel comfortable that we'll be able to tackle it when it comes forward. And I guess just the note too with Lahaina, a lot of it is shallow flooding, so nothing real deep, so that makes things a little bit easier to administer.
Okay, holy moly, best of luck. Thanks, Chair.
Member Rollins Fernandez, your turn for questions.
Mahalo, Chair. I am supportive of this legislation. I think what I was looking at the amendments that you had to see what your concerns were that you were trying to address on your ASF, but it looks like it's non-substantive. And then I had the same question as Member Kama, and then I was wondering if it would be good to include somewhere in there that the zoning acronyms, or I don't know if they're acronyms, they're just like code, are defined in the definitions section above. And then that way, if anyone's just looking at this section, that they'll know that they'll where to find those zoning codes. Because they are defined, well, yeah, they're defined above. And I was looking at the definitions. I think this is outside of the bill itself, but I was looking for what FIRM stood for. And unlike how FEMA is in quotes FEMA and then it spells it out, FIRM is not FIRM and then flood insurance rate map. So I would recommend amending that section because I was looking for what FIRM stood for in the definition section, and I had to go Google it because I couldn't find it. Sorry, more just technical input. I don't know if I have like so much questions.
So let's ask Director Molina for a response.
About what?
About your question.
Just in response.
He can clarify.
Oh, okay. I didn't have any questions. I was making comments,
Director
but he
Molina.
can respond to the comments I've made.
Where would people normally find clarification on a flood map?
In the definitions section.
The definitions.
No, that wasn't my question.
Okay.
All of that is found in the definitions section. And so what I was saying that in 16.29.040, subsection A applicability, that perhaps there can be, reference to the definition section, which is 16.29.030, because not everyone's like looking at the entirety of the code. And so if they're just looking at this section alone without having access to the section before it, and without looking at it, like Member Kama asked, like, what do these letters mean? And then if they don't have that section, like this bill doesn't have that section, then someone won't know to look there necessarily unless they know how to read our code. You know what I mean?
Okay, got
So
it.
if there can be a reference to that section under this section, I think that would be helpful for folks that see the bill.
Got it. Staff, you got that? Member Sinisi, you have questions for the director?
Mahalo, Chair, and understand, mahalo, Director Molina, I understand that this will be, the first phase will be creating a map, or the map's already kind of.
Yeah, so this bill just creates the process for adopting mapping, and we are with FEMA working on finalizing the maps for Lahaina.
Oh, okay. And then just a couple questions that I was just thinking of. Would it require the county anticipating acquiring some properties? Would it include? It wouldn't include paving over streams or anything like that, or going through Seaworm to get all of that? Or does it also affect maybe some of the potential wetlands that might be in certain areas? I know Hana, we have some wetlands.
No, so this pertains to development on private property and how people build on their property. So it doesn't affect any, or it doesn't prompt us, the county, to undertake any projects as a result. Part of this program, though, is for repetitive loss properties. There is hazard mitigation funding that can be supported to buy out certain properties that are problematic. So that's a mechanism that the county can pursue, kind of separate from this regulation, which is intended to manage how people build. Basically, so they know when they're building in a flood zone that they build appropriately, and we don't end up with Kihei, where everyone, a lot of that predates the flood program. So none of the mitigations were put into those properties, and so people are surprised when they see flooding, even though we know it floods in those areas.
Got it, especially when we're going to be starting to rebuild most of Lahaina.
Correct. So that's what's driving us to have to bring this forward, is we becoming aware of the hazard, and for people to also be aware of it, and then the decision about whether it's just a recommendation to people, or we want to regulate them to make sure those protections are put into place when they rebuild.
Okay, and again, this, I thought Nohe was showing me a map of the entire island, but this is particular to Lahaina for now.
Yeah, so there's the firm maps are for countywide that exist currently. And so the map for Lahaina would be an expansion of that to add the additional areas that have not been mapped previously.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Member Sinisi. Member Hodges?
Thank you. For the record, I was showing Member Sinensi the flood hazard assessment tool, where it shows all the different flood zones. It doesn't necessarily give a definition of what all the zones mean, but it shows you where the zones are. I don't think I have too many questions. I do know that the processing is going really well, so I'm super stoked on that because it was difficult before, but I heard it's going well. I guess I do have one question. For the 1,000 parcels now may be affected by the flood map, that's island-wide or not just Lahaina?
No, that's just the Lahaina parcels.
That's just the Lahaina. Okay. So then island-wide, then we can assume what kind of increase?
It depends on what we're going to undertake, but generally the flood mapping that was done previously was more your coastal hazards. So like in Lahaina in particular, like it wasn't really mapped except for the very low-lying areas and those coastal inundation areas.
Wow. Okay. And then the mapping is we're still anticipating it to be done next month.
Yeah, unfortunately, we were able to restart with FEMA after the administration changeover, so we're moving ahead with finalizing the mapping, and we're on track for about a May, we estimate.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. That's all I have. Thank you.
Member Sugimura?
This is fabulous. So I'm sure that our chair here can hardly wait for you to do Kihei as well, or South Maui, as well as how is upcountry impacting him, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so we are, county is initiating its own on those studies in our problem areas in Kihei. Not solely for adding more people to the flood regulation, but also to help guide us on what kind of capital projects we might be able to undertake. But, for me, my view on Kihei is that we can't build the mega infrastructure to protect everybody. And so it's going to be a combination of what we can build and then regulating people to ensure they have protections on their property through the flood regulations too.
Yeah, so all that we've learned because of the wildfire and to be ready for not that we want it, but the next big one, and how to harden our private properties and the surrounding environment. So will you be, when you go to the community, besides showing your maps, are you going to also bring in that portion of this, or is it purely informational on your property needs to do, or is in this flood-prone area?
Yeah, so the way the program is set up, it's really triggered by development. And so if people aren't developing, there's nothing to require them to do. So the first thing is just awareness of their hazards, what depths of flooding they can anticipate in their areas. And then if they want to pull permits to modify their property or their structures, then they can do so under these, under the flood regulations.
Very good. Very good. I support this.
Thank you. Member Johnson, you have another question?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So no map adding new flood zones will happen until the council passes the ordinance, right? So we have to actually get the map, and then that's the process. Is once we get the map, then we up or down it, or do we modify it, or we say, hey, you need to add this section? I mean, how much do we touch the map, Director?
Yeah, so generally the map, it's a very technical engineering product. And it would be more whether you disagree with the framework of the flood ordinance, which is very limited also because we are directly implementing the National Flood Insurance Program. So, for example, this ordinance had to go through review with the state and FEMA to get their concurrence that it's within the regulation. So a lot of that is, we're kind of stuck with what we get. So it's more or less going to be an up or down vote from council about whether to include these additional areas or not.
And I'm sorry if you mentioned this before, but you're doing the whole county all at once? Or are we doing just Lahaina and sections? How?
Yeah, so right now with FEMA's assistance, we're doing the Lahaina burn zone. So that's the Wahikuli side and the Kauula side. And then DLNR is doing mapping along streams. So we'll have that data. And then we're doing some limited in Kihei, Waiakua, being the first one we're working on right now. Thank you.
So as a homeowner, take for example my cousin guys in Waiakuli, they'll see it and they'll say, the map would say you are or you're not in that extended flood zone, and then they can go to the county and say, hey, because we are in it, we're going to help them with the permits, make it easier for them to get the permits to build, more hardening, or what the choices they have.
If you look at help as us telling them how to do it, then yeah, but it is an additional requirement on them. So it will be a burden for the most part for people to have to adopt these new standards.
Right.
In consideration for the safety mitigation it provides them. So it helps depending on how you look at it, but it's also an additional regulation and additional cost on these properties in Lahaina.
The cost is permit costs and design costs, right?
Yeah, and the construction, for the most part, you need to elevate these structures, so that's not generally more expensive than slab on grade. Depending how deep you need to elevate, as the higher you go, the more expensive it is. So those types of mitigations that will be required in those rebuilds add costs to home construction.
Okay, so they'll, all right. And I know you mentioned it earlier, we're going to have ample time for community input because I think that's really an important part of this phase. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Okay. Member Kama?
Thank you, Chair. All my questions have been answered, and I support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Lee?
Just wanted to ask Jordan again. I think you said in one of your responses mentioned a 200-year storm. Did you say that?
No, 100 years what the models for the mapping are designed
Okay,
to.
what defines a 100-year storm?
Basically, it's the 1% chance of a certain intensity of rainfall event occurring. So, yeah, one every 100 years, a rain big enough.
So the duration and the amount of water it generates?
Correct.
So
they-
what would that be?
I can't say exactly what it is, but it's partly on historical rainfall data to determine what that amount of rainfall they assume for purposes of modeling. And
Okay, when was the last time we had the 100-year storm?
I would have to get back to you on that. It
Oh, okay,
doesn't happen.
not recently.
No, I don't believe we've seen one. Although I will say that in the Kihei flood that happened in 2022.
It happens every year.
Excuse me, that's our in-house engineer talking.
Yeah. There was some rain gauges that indicated a 200 to 500 year rainfall in certain areas, but we don't have the best rain gauges across the county. So some areas probably could see it more than others, but for most of our developed areas, I don't think we've seen one that big.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Member Paulton? Your turn.
Can a regular person fill out the flood permit themselves, or do they need like some sort of degree of expertise?
I will have to follow up on you with that, but depending on what they're trying to accomplish, it could require involving surveyors and engineers to produce some of the mapping requirements for the project.
Do you know what a civil engineer charges per hour?
In the range of $150 per hour.
And like we said in Kihei, they flood a lot. I'm not sure if it's in the flood hazard area mapping already, but is there any kind of ramification to already built houses, or this is only triggered by new development and not just development?
There is a threshold on the replacement value. Once you exceed 50%, then you become required to comply. Most repairs we've seen do not hit that threshold though. So even though you're existing in a floodplain regulated, you may not necessarily trigger the full-blown requirements of the flood program.
Okay, so if you are doing renovations that are 50% or more, then you might have to get a flood permit and hire a civil engineer and elevate and all the things.
Correct.
And do you know if it's a low to moderate income family that they could get assistance with the CDBG-DR, the additional costs that now that they're going to have to comply with flood permit kind of stuff, and the timeline for when these costs would be applied to those that are rebuilding? If April is the public outreach, and then maybe we adopt this maybe in June, anybody that rebuilds in July, August, or, when the CDBG-DR monies become available?
Director?
Yeah, so as soon as, if this map or the additional maps were enacted, then whenever that ordinance takes effect, it would apply to those rebuild permits at that time. I'm not sure on the CDBG applicability. I'm assuming those kinds of costs are part of the program, but I would have to defer to Officer Recovery to get back to you on that.
And when you say part of the program, would it be part of the program for everyone or just the low to moderate income families?
Regarding the CDBG, as I understand it, it's primarily low to moderate income.
Okay. So then everybody else is just kind of SOL and they got to come up with hundreds of dollars on their own.
Unfortunately, that's the trade-off, and that's where we struggle bringing this forward. So I had to pick a hat, and so I'm charged with administering the flood program, and the hat I chose was to ensure these hazards are addressed when people rebuild, and that's why I'm asking council to adopt the map too. Thank you.
Do we have any vacancies in the flood permitting division?
Not at this time, but we are limited to a staff of 1 at this point, and slowly growing that program as we transition out of planning and into public works.
How many are you going to grow it to? 3?
We don't have a good sense at this point, but we do have some consultant staff on board to help carry the load of the program, because it's not just the reviews. We have annual audits and other requirements of the program that we have to satisfy as well.
So 4-Leaf can do flood permitting as well?
Right now, there are not. Potentially, we could look at whether we bring them in, but I know we're keeping up at the moment. And we might have a different consultant helping us on the flood permit because it's kind of its own technical review that's required.
Okay, thank you. I heard the bell.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Member Rollins Fernandez, any questions for the director?
Mahalo, Chair. I appreciate Director's candidness and the struggle of choosing how to approach this, because private insurance companies is such a scam. So I get it. The CEOs of the companies make millions of dollars a year at the expense of people being denied their claims. Thank you for letting me say that. I don't have any additional information. Member Paulton's got to mute.
Okay. Thank you, Member.
But I did send my amendments to staff. And then I guess I do have a question for staff, but I can hold it until we're like actually making the amendments, if you prefer, Chair.
Okay, let's finish our rounds of questions and then we can do that. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Mahalo, Chair.
Member Paulton has something burning.
Sorry, I just got to make a disclosure. I have another adult male in the house, George Vieira Pauhana.
Okay, so noted. Tell him hi. Okay, Councilmember Sinensi.
Thank you, Chair, for Director Molina. So for this piece, when people come in for their permitting, this would be another review of their plans.
Thank you, Member Sinensi. It's a whole additional permit on top of the building permit.
On top of your building permit, you have to go through this, and you cannot bypass it. You have this will be part of your permit being approved.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Hodges.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up on Member Paulton's line of questioning. So not only when I had to do flood permits did I had to get an engineer to help me complete this permit, but you also had to get a surveyor, as you said, which we don't have too many surveyors. And the surveyors we do have are so busy. I've been trying to convince one of my boys and even my daughter to become a surveyor in the future because they make really good money and we are in complete desperate need. And so not only was it an issue finding somebody as an engineer to do the work, but as a surveyor to shoot your base flood elevation when you're going to submit this permit. But I wanted you to confirm, Dr. Molina, when you were talking about the 50% ratio and when they have to comply to flood, it's not the structure of the building, but rather the valuation of the building, yes? Or is it the structure? I can't remember.
I believe it's the value of the building.
So right now with construction materials being so expensive, do you see that altering how much the construction is going to cost and changing how much people might need to comply with the flood if it's so expensive to repair?
Potentially, like, a Lahaina aside, because everyone's rebuilding already, but for an existing property, that definitely can be a factor if the house is small and low value or single family. We don't see it as much with the condos because the condos have so much value that some of those unit repairs will pretty much never really trigger that threshold. And then also there's a 10-year look-back period. And so the 50% accumulation of repairs only goes back 10 years under the federal program. So that's another parameter on that question.
Yeah. I remember doing a few of those and having to log all the renovations to a certain structure, and it adds up quickly if you have a small place, but not so much if your property value is, let's say, $10 million, like certain people's ones. Your renovations are going to be quite small, but if your house is not worth very much, you'll hit that 50% trigger really fast. Thank you.
So members, is there a need for another round of questions? The chair has a brief question and then we would move on. So, Director Molina, can you give kind of a thumbnail sketch of what some of the improvements may need to be done? I mean, like, you might have to bolt down a propane tank, you might have to elevate your AC unit.
I'm not versed enough to give you the best examples, but yeah, elevating the structure above the base flood elevation or the flood depths is generally the requirement, as well as some of the equipment involved has to be elevated as well. I guess that's all I'll speak to for that question. Thank you.
Well, I think that we're fortunate that we've moved the flood review from planning to public works. It'll be done much more efficiently and effectively. It will cost some money, but one perspective too is when it's done more commonly, it might be less expensive per unit because the people on the island will be more familiar with it. So I'm just trying to be encouraging. It is really, I mean, Kihei is a classic example of people not being thoughtful and taking precautions because they didn't know. But if you are in a situation, you'd be really glad you spent that extra money and take the precautions because it won't affect you as much. Okay. Okay, seeing that there's no further discussion, we'll move on to the decision making. The chair would like to entertain a motion to recommend passage of Bill 28, 2025 on first reading.
Second.
So moved by Member Sugimura, seconded by Member Kama. Members, any discussion before I move on to my amended summary form?
Proceed.
Chair, I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Okay, no problem. Member Paulton?
It's for Director Molina. We recently heard about Halekaiola having like drainage issues, but I don't know if it has to do with base flood elevation or, faulty engineering or whatever. How does that kind of thing where we constructed something and now there's drainage issues that cause flooding, how does that play into additional flood hazard areas? Like, just wondering.
Director?
I guess I'd have to get more information on the specifics as far as whether it's a construction issue or they're in an area that, is known to be flood prone. Kind of two different dynamics. One, they could have created on their own versus one was always an existing condition based on the topography of the area.
And so if it's something that they themselves created, it wouldn't be an addition to the flood hazard area map, even though the result is the same, or are you aware?
I'm not aware on that particular issue, but yeah, if it's a drainage issue they created from their site, then that wouldn't be within the framework of a flood development permit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the leeway, Chair. Just burning question.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and we've just said there are discussion. I'm going to move on to my amendment summary form. Any objections?
No objections.
Members, your chair would like to entertain a motion to substitute Bill 28, 2025 with a proposed CD1 version,
So move.
Second.
incorporating the amendments referred to in the ASF's description. Motion made by Councilmember Sugimura, seconded by Member Kama, to substitute Bill 28 with the proposed CD1 version. Members, this ASF incorporates non-substantive and technical revisions for clarity, consistency, and style. Any discussion? I think now Member Rollins Fernandez.
Mahalo, Chair. I support the motion to substitute with the amendments that you propose. I guess I would first call on Ms. Nakata to provide feedback on the two amendments that I was looking at. One is an amendment to section 16.29.040, and it would read subsection A1, the last line. The following special flood hazard area defined in 16.29.030 are established. So it would just add defined in 16.29.030. So Chair, if you will allow, I'd like to ask Ms. Nakata to provide feedback on that proposed amendment.
Ms. Nagata.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Staff would have to confess, I'm a little confused about if the intention is to refer to the definition of special flood hazard area that's in 16.29.030, which reads, special flood hazard area means an area having special flood or flood-related erosion hazards and shown on a firm as Zone A, A0, AE, AEF, A99, AHD, VE, or V. There are two terms from the four that are listed in A1 that also have definitions. Those are general floodplain and coastal high hazard areas, and those have 5 of the zones in them. Floodway area and flood fringe area are not in the definitional section. So is the intention to refer to the special flood hazard definition as opposed to the individual definitions? And the other question, I think this might be for Director Molina, is the definition of special flood hazard area also contains a zone A99, which is not listed in 1629.040.
Director Molina, would you like to comment?
Mahalo, Ms. Nakata. Do you want me to hear my intention first, or you want to hear from Director Molina?
No, why don't you do yours?
I don't care, whatever.
No, go ahead and do yours,
Okay,
and then he'll have a comment after Paul. Thanks.
Okay. My intention was for each of the descriptions, the A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, however we're now naming it, labeling it. So floodway area, coastal high hazard area, but also so that there's some kind of reference to the letters, because generally we don't use acronyms, and these are not acronyms. They're like codes, or Director Molina can explain that better. But they're letters on the map indicating what kind of area they are on the map. And so I get all that, but if someone's just like reading it, and if the assumption when reading it is that you're supposed to know what these letters mean and you don't, then it's not helpful. So that's why I wanted to make some kind of reference to the definition section, so that when folks are reading this section, that there's some kind of clues for them to be able to understand it better. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Director Molina.
Okay, a couple of different things going on. I guess I want to start with what's defined. Staff was correct that like floodway and flood fringe area are not defined per se, but floodway is defined and flood fringe is defined. I gotta follow up with staff on A99. I think that might just be a historical reference that is no longer used. And then I guess just to Councilmember Kiani or Rollins Fernandez's comment, my only response is you got to read the whole chapter in its entirety. And it's, the way I understand it is like those definitions, it's already understood that you have to go back to the definition sections when you're reading through an entirety of a code. And just knowing the delineations, which these letterings are, is just the beginning of understanding kind of the full depth of the code. And so it's, I guess for anybody watching, you got to read the whole chapter to understand exactly what's going on here, because yeah, the amendments by themselves will be not understood well. Thank you, Chair.
Member Rollins Fernandez.
Hello, Chair. I understand what the director is saying, but the bill doesn't have the whole chapter, and so when folks are reading just the bill, then they, I don't know how well, average folks understand like how to access the Maui County Code and how to read the entirety of the chapter and all that. So I'm just trying to be helpful to someone who might be reading the bill and not know to go in the section before, which is definitions, to know what these things mean. But if it's problematic, I don't have to add it, but I would like to, because I think it would be helpful.
Chair's comment is basically this is part of it is a highly technical, the flood control has many different components, but maybe the director can weigh in on the impact of modifying the way that it's written. We're trying to accomplish your objectives to be able to implement it.
Thank you, Chair. As a former OCS analyst, I don't like that drafting, but I don't think it affects the bill at all, so I would have no objection on it. Thank you.
Okay. So staff,
As a former OCS.
are you capable of, okay.
Ask the former OCS analyst how he would write it.
I think it's understood already, but I can understand the concern in providing additional direction. So I don't think it has effect, and so no objection. Thank you.
Chair, we can go ahead and add in the reference to the definitions is 1629030, but as I stated earlier, currently the only place that all of the zones are designated in a definition is the special flood hazard area definition. Thank you, Chair.
So staff, where does that leave us for rewriting it?
Chair would ultimately defer to our legislative attorney.
Chair, I think what Member Rollins Fernandez is requesting is that in the second sentence of section 1629040A, it read the following special flood hazard areas, comma, as defined in section 16.29.030, comma, are established.
Okay. Any objections from the body? No? Okay.
Oh,
How does that meet? Okay, Member Rollins Fernandez.
mahalo, Chair. That's what I wrote. But I think I have to actually make a motion unless you're accepting it as a friendly amendment. Rosenberg's is new, and you can do all kinds of things without like things that, Robert's required, so.
Friendly amendment.
Okay. And then there was no objection. And then the other amendment I wanted to make, I think, is outside of the scope of this bill, but I wanted to confirm with Ms. Nakata. And that was to amend the 16.29.030, and that's the definitions.
Ms. Nagata.
Sorry, Chair, was this the amendment dealing with firm?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So currently there's a definition in 1629.030. It says flood insurance rate map, paren firm means, and so the definition is already there. Thank you, Chair.
But I can make that amendment in this bill?
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the amendment? I thought it was that you were thinking there was no defined term for firm.
No. So I wanted to make it similar to the way FEMA is defined. So firm and then means flood insurance rate map, which is a map that the FEMA or Federal Insurance Administration has delineated both.
Apologies, Chair. Which section are you in, please, member?
In the definition section, where it defines flood insurance rate map, firm.
Could you please repeat the amendment? Are you talking about breaking out flood insurance rate map per and firm into two separate definitions?
No. I'm gonna text it to you. So firm means flood insurance rate map.
Okay, apologies. Yes, Chair, we can incorporate that. Is there a motion?
Or friendly amendment.
Body.
Friendly amendment, sure.
The body's accepting another friendly amendment. Does staff have track of this?
All right.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Staff has track. We have two friendly amendments that have been approved. We currently have a motion on the floor for substitution, I believe. All in favor of the substitution? Have we voted on that yet? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Chair, that's 9 ayes, 0 noes. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you, members. Now we're back to the main motion as amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All All in favor?
Aye.
Chair, that's 9 ayes, 0 noes. The motion passes.
Seeing no further discussion. Okay, Thank you, members, and thank you, Director Molina. This item will move on to the full council's consideration. Now let's move on to our next item. Chair proposes that we take a 3-minute break or 2-minute break for, let's take a 5-minute break for bio. Thanks. So we'll return back at 2:43.
Oh, you're being generous, giving us a whole hour.
Will the Water and Infrastructure Committee meeting of 3/17/245 reconvene? Okay, members, our second item is Bill 19, 2025, entitled "A Bill for an Ordinance Authorizing the Mayor to Enter into an Intergovernmental Agreement with the U.S. Geological Survey." Bill 19's purpose is to authorize the mayor to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the U.S. Geological Survey for a groundwater availability study in West Maui. Members, during the Water and Infrastructure Committee meeting of September 12, 2024, last council term, we discussed Bill 133, 2024, now Ordinance 5707, which entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the U.S. Geological Survey's Cooperative Water Resource Monitoring Program. During that meeting, the Department of Water Supply noted they had begun doing reconnaissance and permitting for a new deep monitoring well in Laniapoko. In the council-adopted fiscal year 2025 budget, the Department of Water Supply allocated funding for this program and noted in their budget details a new monitoring well in Laniapoko's aquifer. Before we begin, Mrs. Blumenstein, would you please provide opening comments to this item? Welcome.
Sure, Aloha Chair. Mahalo for that. So, thank you. In September, you approved the intergovernmental agreement for our ongoing water resource monitoring program. And that program includes 5 monitoring wells. And we had contracted USGS previously to do some very preliminary recon to add a deep monitoring well in West Maui, where there's only one currently in Honokoi Aquifer. So we couldn't include it in our September IGA because we did not have a proposal from a joint funding agreement with proposal from USGS, and we also wanted to reach out to other stakeholders in the region that would benefit from the well, West Maui Land and the State Water Commission, to see if they wanted to contribute funding. And so this was going back and forth for a while, but now we have the Water Commission agreed to split the cost with us, and we received a revised proposal from USGS in January. USGS did retain the same contract performance period and billing cycle as the original resource monitoring agreement, because that aligns with the federal fiscal year. Just want to clarify that it has not been any work done without the intergovernmental agreement to date. So there will be no billing until that is executed. So this will be on the Water Commission's agenda tomorrow for this exactly the same joint funding agreement. So we would split the total cost of phase 1, 180,000, and USGS would contribute 30,000 of that amount. So the 2 separate joint funding agreements are identical. With ours, we contribute 75,000, and the Commission contributes 75,000 plus the USGS portion. So thank you so much for taking this up today.
Okay, thank you for that. At this time, I'd like to open for public testimony for Y-4. Staff, do we have any testifiers?
Chair, we currently don't have any individuals signed up to testify on this item. If anyone would like to testify, please come up to the podium or unmute yourself on Teams and begin your testimony. This is final call. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Members, seeing that there are no individuals wishing to testify, without objection, I will now close oral testimony. As a reminder, written testimony will continue to be accepted into the record. Members, I'm proposing 2 rounds of 3-minute questions per member. Are there any objections? Thank you, members. Let's begin. Vice Chair Sugimura.
I support this. I just wondered, what is the U.S. Geological Survey? So they're basically what is their role? Are we paying them or?
Yes, thank you, member. So we are contracting USGS to do the reconnaissance permitting, the monitoring well design, and then once the well or wells are drilled, they would maintain monitoring of the groundwater levels and chlorides and whatnot. And in this case, they're also contributing $30,000 to the joint funding agreement.
Oh, okay. So they're doing it and we're also participating.
Yes.
You. Thank you very much. I support this.
Councilmember Johnson, any questions?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Chair. So it sounds to me that the 30,000 is what their USGS is kicking, but of that reconnaissance and permitting, is there a number attached to that, Ms. Blumenstein?
Well, so yeah, that is just the limit of the federal contribution, but the whole phase one, 180,000.
Okay.
That is split between us, the Water Commission, and a minor portion by USGS. That is really the field reconnaissance, development of the deep monitor wells specifications, and then selecting one or several monitoring well sites. And they're doing that with some outreach and stakeholder input.
Okay.
And then, yeah, that's phase one.
I just was curious about the cost. So you initially mentioned that West Maui Land was considering contributing to this, or did they put any money in, and what was the response?
We inquired with West Maui Land, and they declined to contribute.
Will they be receiving any of that water?
Well, this is just a monitoring tool. Yeah, so
Okay.
This is not going to be
All right.
turned into a production well. This is really just to
Thanks for
figure out what's going on in Docker. Yeah.
I mean, if you're not going to pay, then I got you. Okay. I'm really curious of why we would have to go through USGS if wouldn't the department just want to pay for it themselves and not have to go through an intergovernmental agreement? I mean, can you kind of go through the benefits of why you would go through them when you could just do this yourself?
Well, we could and we could not. So we have a couple of monitoring wells where in most cases we own the monitoring well, but in most cases we contract USGS to do whether it's monthly or quarterly monitoring and maintaining the data for us.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 wells where the commission comes out twice a year. Some more limited monitoring going on, and that's included, in their overall monitoring program. So ultimately, it's really a collaboration between the 3 of us, USGS, the Water Commission, us. We don't have the staff to do monitoring for groundwater levels or not. We don't even have hydrologists on staff, so we have to contract somebody.
We don't have hydrologists on staff. Is that a concern that you have for your department? Do you think we need one?
We never had one, but
okay.
As a comparison, the Honolulu Board of Water Supply have several. So there's certainly benefits to having hydrologists on staff. So we contract both for project specific and in this case for resource monitoring.
Yeah, I understand if it's hard to get them because contracting seems to be much more faster, efficient. So, all right. Thank you for your response. Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
Okay, Member Kama.
I have no questions, Chair.
Okay. Chair Lee is,
No questions.
oh, there you are. Okay. Councilmember Paulton, any questions?
You know that. So my question is there a shallow monitoring well, or is deep monitoring well the only kind there is?
There is both. So we don't know necessarily that this will be a deep monitoring well, but that was the original proposal from USGS. So I think both the site reconnaissance and evaluating the data in there will determine if it should be a deep monitoring well or not. I'm guessing.
Did you guys choose the location already?
I'm sorry.
Did you choose the location already?
No. That will be phase 1.
Who's going to help you choose the location?
So USGS, really, that's what we're contracting them to do, but they're doing that in collaboration with hydrologists at the Water Commission primarily.
And then I heard that the Lania Poco aquifer is on top of like a rock or something, so it shouldn't be affected by sea level rise. Is there only that one water source in the Lania Poco area, or is there multiple aquifers? Or do you know?
So, I mean, yes, I know that there is some rock or sediment formation, in at least in the southern portion of Lania Poco aquifer, but this monitoring wells really helped to refine the numerical groundwater model that we have that's a decade old to get better data from Lania Poco. And it may be that the recommendations from USGS is that we should add a second monitoring well in the same aquifer, or perhaps, in the adjacent aquifer. So it really should just help overall understanding, groundwater conditions in the region.
How accurate would one well be, or you wouldn't know until you drill it? And then if there's a rock in there, would the chlorides be less because you're not going to have saltwater intrusion?
Well, if there was a production well and you drilled that in an area where you have rock formation or sediments, so you would have less chance of sea level rise. It would kind of be like a little beefed up freshwater lens in that area. That's one thing, but this is really the monitoring well. So that is what we want USGS to figure out, given the objectives of additional withdrawals from the aquifer, given the objectives of addressing groundwater recharge changes, what is the optimal location for one or several monitoring wells? So I don't know that yet.
Would that monitoring wells then lead to production wells if the capacity is sufficient?
No,
Like, what could be
the
the
objective of this
outcomes?
well is just for monitoring purposes, but there are, we have in our capital improvement program proposed additional wells to supplement the department system. But this is not the purpose of, this is just a monitoring well, not a production well.
Okay, I heard my bell come around for a second time.
Thank you. Member Rollins Fernandez, it's your turn for questions.
Hello, Chair. I don't have any questions. I am very supportive of monitoring wells, and because I am concerned about all the water, the stream. I ran into Seaworm's hydrologist for stream protection, and he was really concerned about the levels of in-stream flow for all of Maui, especially West Maui and East Maui. And it hasn't been recorded as low as it has for over 100 years ago, like 107 or something years ago. So I'm super concerned about drawing from the aquifer if the streams are so low and the recharge just isn't there because of climate change, etc. So supportive of monitoring wells, especially if USGS is going to pay for it. It's great.
Thank you. Member Sinensi, you have questions?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a follow-up for Ms. Blumenstein. I think she mentioned that there were 2 deep monitor wells, or I see one on the map that says Mahina Hina. Would Lania Poco be the second or the third deep?
So for West Maui, there's only the Mahina Hina in the Honokowai aquifer adjacent. So there is none in Lania Poco right now.
Okay, this would be the second.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's the only clarifying question, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Hodgins?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Water Department, for being here. I have no questions. Happy to support.
Okay, members, is there a need for a second round? Raise of hands. Member Kama?
I just want to know, who owns the 2 wells?
The question again?
Who owns the 2 wells?
Ms. Blumenstein?
So there's one existing monitoring well in West Maui in Honokawai, and that's owned by the Water Commission. This would be a new second well that we're contracting USGS for.
So do they own both wells?
So depending on phase one, whether USGS will recommend 1 or 2 deep monitor wells, we have put funds in, we're proposing funds to pay for development of the monitoring well. And the Water Commission is doing the same thing. So if there's just one, we won't own it together. So we're sort of both trying to secure some federal hazard mitigation grant program funds to pay for development. So whoever is more successful, I guess, will be owning the well.
So who owns the Mahina Hina well?
The Water Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Lee, are you here? No. Okay, Member Paulton?
Regardless of who owns it, do the entities share the data?
Yes, because we contract USGS, that will be maintained through their national resource monitoring program.
So it would be available publicly as well?
Yeah.
And then, depending on if this deep monitoring well gives us all the information we need, or we need to build or drill a second deep monitoring well, could the data spur other kinds of outcomes like, we have so small sustainable yield, you guys really need to put more water back in the stream for recharge, or you need to pump less from your existing wells, or there's so much water, go crazy, develop all you like? What are possible ramifications depending on what the data shows?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above, really. I mean, it's both for us to guide future development of wells and operations of existing wells, and for the commission to gauge, the health of the aquifer. The only monitoring well there is now in Honokawai that was, part of the data that was looked at for designation of West Maui, the health of the aquifer. So, they're really important both for, long-term maintenance and just, in this case too, to refine the numerical groundwater model that USGS completed about a decade ago.
And have you heard of any federal cuts to USGS? Just, theme of the...
I'm not aware.
Okay. And that's funded by federal funds?
Yes, the small portion, the $30,000 from USGS, but in terms of the next phases to pay for actual drilling of the well, we're asking for federal funds for that, because that'd be a couple of millions. So
I meant if the USGS is funded by federal funds.
Yes, they are.
The federal agency.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, so it may or may not exist next month. Thank you.
Okay, Member Rollins Fernandez, is there a need for a second question?
Hello, Chair. I didn't raise my hand. No questions.
Okay. Member Sinensi? Okay. So members, is there anybody feel a need for additional questions before we? Okay. So my comments and questions, Mrs. Blumenstein, we noted that the performance period in the agreement runs from October 1st, 2024 through September 30th, 2025. In the department's February 28th, 2025 correspondence, the department indicated that the phase one work is not anticipated to be completed by the end date, and that the performance period can be changed by mutual agreement. However, the bill does not allow for changes to the duration of the agreement without returning to the council for approval. If this bill should pass, will the department be returning to the council with a bill to amend the duration of the agreement in July so that the council may consider any extensions before the agreement expires in September?
We probably need to do that, yes. I mean, I think the 12-month performance period was a little lengthy for phase one, especially because USGS had already taken on some of the recon. But if they are unable to complete deliverables by September, yes, then we will have to come in for a no-cost extension.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, seeing no further discussion, we'll move on to decision-making. The chair would like to entertain a motion to recommend passage of Bill 19, 2025 on first reading. So
Second.
moved by Member Sugimura, seconded by Member Kama. Members, any discussion? Members, your chair would like to entertain a motion to substitute Bill 19, 2025 with the attached proposed CD1 version incorporating the amendments referred to in the ASF's description. So moved by Member Sugimura, seconded by Member Kama. Members, this ASF amends the bill's title, incorporates non-substantive and technical revisions for clarity, consistency, and style. Any discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Chair, that's 8 ayes, 0 noes, and Chair Lee excused. The motion passes.
Thank
Back
you,
to the main
members.
motion as amended.
Thank you, members. Now we're back to the main motion as amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Chair, that's
Thank you.
8 ayes, 0 noes. With Chair Lee excused, the motion passes.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Mrs. Blumenstein. This item will move on to the full council consideration. Now we're going to move on to our next item, and we'll take a 3-minute break, recess. We'll reconvene at 3:10. Will the Water and Infrastructure Committee of March 17th, 2025 reconvene, come to order? The time is now 3:11 p.m. I would like to welcome Director Shane Angawa from the Department of Emergency Management and also Mr. Theo Leong, Wastewater Operations Training Officer.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon.
Environmental management, right? Environmental management.
Well, typo. Okay, now on to our last item. Members, our second item is Bill 16, 2025, entitled, "A Bill for an Ordinance Authorizing the Mayor to Enter into an Intergovernmental Agreement with the State Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, Hawaii Occupational Safety and Health Division, for the settlement of all alleged violations at the Kihei Wastewater Reclamation Facility." Bill 16, 2025's purpose is to authorize the mayor to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the State Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, Hawaii Occupational Safety and Health Division, for the settlement of an alleged violations at the Kihei Wastewater Reclamation Facility in the amount of $28,062.30. Before we begin, Director Agawa, would you please provide opening comments on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So just to give a little bit of background, back in July of 2024, HIOSH did an inspection of our Kihei Wastewater Reclamation Facility, and they found some violations. We, as a department and as wastewater division, we take these violations very seriously. So I believe there were 20 violations, and as you look in the records, all the violations have been addressed to this point. Some even were addressed the day of the inspection. And as Chair Cook stated, the violation amounts to a little over $28,000. The original violation was more than that, and then HIOSH gave us a 30% reduction in violation costs, but we're still over the $25,000. So we heard before you for approval, and we hope you guys support us on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ogawa. Before we begin our discussion, let's see if anyone would like to provide testimony on Y-3. Staff?
Thank you, Chair. There's currently no individual signed up to testify. If anyone would like to testify, please come up to the podium or raise your hand on Teams. This is final call. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Members, seeing that there are no more individuals wishing to testify without objections, I will now close oral testimony.
No objections.
As a reminder, written testimony will continue to be accepted into the record. Members, I'm proposing I also want to welcome Councilmember Sugimura. Members, I'm proposing 2 rounds of 3-minute questions per member. Are there any objections? And is Member Rollins Fernandez with us? No, okay. Thank you, members. Let's begin discussion. We will start with Vice Chair Sugimura.
Good job on the resolving. The total amount would have been $40,000, and because of your expeditious resolving, I see that it's down to $28,000. Okay, so the serious charges, which are the beginning ones listed, so are those resolved by now?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Member Sugimura. Yes, those have been resolved. Everything has been resolved up to this point, yes.
Okay, so all of the violations have been resolved. You just want the authorization to make the $28,000 payment.
Yes, that is correct.
Very good on resolving it. That's the important part. So thank you very much, and I support this. Thank you very much, Chair.
Member Johnson, do you have questions for the department?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Director. Unfortunate that we are meeting on this type of issue, but I got just a question. So Kihei got fined and penalized. What did they do? Did they go and check out all of the other wastewaters, or was just that one had all of these?
Thank you, Chair, Member Johnson. So today we have Theo Leong, who's our wastewater operations training officer. He can answer that question.
Yes, Member Johnson, they only came to our wastewater treatment plant in Kihei, specifically to look at the central maintenance area.
Okay, so having learned from that scenario, are you proactively going to the other wastewater treatment plants and making sure there's the ladders, like all the lists of all the things?
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
So you're confident that those other wastewater treatment plants wouldn't get these type of penalties?
Yes, that's correct. Not for these penalties.
Okay. Those are my questions. You know, I always am concerned about our workers as far as wages, and now we're with some of these unsafe practices. I'm glad that we're trying to, you know, squash them and make them safe for our workers, because it ties into retaining people. They don't want to work for low wages and in unsafe environments. So I think that's an important point that we have to hammer in. So thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Member Kama?
Thank you, Chair. I am so glad to read through the report to see that the corrections are made, the fines are listed, and there's quite a few where the fines are zero. So I guess that must be our discount. But I too am happy to hear that upon receiving the violations, immediately you went into correction mode and did what you could that day of and continued to work throughout the rest until it was all cleared up. So I'm very much impressed. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So I'm supportive of this bill. Thank you.
Chair Lee is excused. Member Paulton?
Thank you. First question, was this a random inspection or was there a complaint made?
It was a random inspection.
And then are our supervisors not trained to comply with HIOSH standards?
Yes, Member Paulton, they are. They all receive training.
Is that position vacant at the wastewater treatment facility in South Maui?
Chair, if I may address that?
Yeah, please, Director.
That's a good question. Thank you, Member Paulton. So, as you know, Theo is our operations training officer, otherwise known as safety specialist for wastewater. We do have Theo TA'd after the Lahaina wildfires. We do not have a collection superintendent. So we've asked Theo to wear several hats, and unfortunately, his bandwidth is only so much, and our priority was Lahaina recovery. So I don't want to make excuses because safety is an important issue, but Theo was doing multitasking at the time, and we are currently trying to fill the vacancy of the superintendent, and hopefully we'll have somebody there, and we don't have to have Theo do multiple duties.
Thank you for doing multiple duties, Theo. My other question is do we have a pool of qualified applicants that we can promote to those positions, or is testing an issue, or position descriptions? Like why can't we get like 3 or 4 more Theos? I mean, Theo's unique, obviously, but similar to him.
I can address that. Thank you for the question. So there's only one safety officer position for our divisions. guess we could use multiple positions. That would include having EPs, right, approved. But in normal times, one safety officer would be enough. It was just because of the wildfires in Lahaina, we were in this situation.
So in the future, if we have a major disaster like that, could we contract out somebody to offset his load? Because, you know, he has to have a quality of life as well.
That's a good question, and I think that would be able to do that.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Member Rollins Fernandez, I don't see you, so we'll move on. Councilmember Senency, have any questions for the department?
Chair, Director, did you mention the violations? I didn't catch that.
Thank you, Member Senency. I did not. They are listed in here. There's 20 of them. I don't know if you want me to go through it all.
I can. Oh, I got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Member Hodgins?
All my questions have been asked and answered. Thank you so much for being here and happy to support this, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. If does anybody have a need for a second round of questions? Seeing none. The chair's comment, I did review them all, and they were a lot of paper type of questions and reporting and documentation and basic Manini. When I first heard of it, I was concerned, was there any like real safety violations from the wastewater plant? And there weren't any. These are all very technical, very reporting type of things. So my compliments to Theo and to the staff. Thank you for your diligence. Seeing no further discussion, we'll move on to decision making. The chair would like to entertain a motion to recommend passage of Bill 16 on first reading.
So moved.
So moved by Member Kama, seconded by Member Sugimura. Any discussion, members? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Staff?
Sure, that's 7 ayes, 0 noes with Chair Lee and Member Rollins Fernandez excused. The motion passes.
Thank you, members, and thank you, Director Agawa. This item will now move on to full council's consideration. Seeing that there's no additional members, this concludes today's Water and Infrastructure Committee meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for a great meeting. The time is now 3:24 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned.